매크로 애니메이션 게임 마신 PC-FX.
The game is FX.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Episode Terror. I got a fun and random episode for you guys this Friday, because it's been about 2 years since I took a look at the NEC PC-FX, the successor console to the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16, and recently I've been getting a lot of questions about the hardware, whether it's worth buying, how to emulate it, and whether or not you should be playing PC-FX games. And I think that's probably because there's been some hints at a potential FPGA core for Mister or an optical disc emulator for the hardware itself. But I will say for Zenki alone, it's 100% worth playing. I don't know if it's worth buying a console for though, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. But the NEC PC-FX is such a strange console compared to the PC Engine. NEC and Hudson Soft basically took everything that made the PC Engine a success and ran away from it. They did the exact opposite. But you can't say that it's not a really nice piece of hardware, because it definitely has a certain vibe going on with this tower design. It is absolutely massive, and I do think it looks incredible on a shelf. And it is still relatively affordable, but it is getting more expensive. So later on in this video, I'm going to give you an emulation tutorial as well if you want to play PC-FX games and have them on your shelf without the hardware. Now, I do not know why, but NEC and Hudson Soft decided that backwards compatibility was not important, and this will not play any PC Engine games. It's a question I get absolutely all the time. It will not play the CD games, nor will it play any sort of HuCard games, but it seems like maybe that was a design decision from the start to possibly include backwards compatibility, because the memory card slot looks like some place that you would put a HuCard. This was definitely a big miss on NEC and Hudson Soft side, and had this thing been backwards compatible, I would 100% recommend you buy one, because it would be amazing. And there are so many different expansions for this, again, all not necessary. Like, you could use this for a CD-ROM drive on the PC-98 computer system with just an extension that would adapt it over to SCSI. Again, it's a very strange use case scenario, but it exists. Now, the nice thing on the video side is you get S-Video out at least, but this uses a different color space in the component side versus RGB, so there really isn't any RGB mod that can be done to this console, which is slightly unfortunate, but S-Video on a CRT looks great. If you're upscaling it, it's going to be a little bit soft though, to be entirely honest with you. Now, the biggest miss here is that on the bottom, in extension 3 here, there was going to be a 3D accelerator card. It exists as the PC-FX GA for both DOS and PC-98 systems, but it does not exist on the console, so it's just a pure 2D powerhouse, but it really is great for 2D. Should you buy one? It's up to you. If you like the games that I'm going to show you after the emulation tutorial, go ahead and pick one up. I recommend it, but that's just me. Now, for everybody else that wants to experience PC-FX games, I always get asked, can you emulate them? And you 100% can in Mednafen. I use MedGUI Reborn because Mednafen is a command line program, and I understand that not all of you know DOS. If you scroll down into the systems directory, you can pick PC-FX right there, and if you're playing games that you own or finding them otherwise, they're going to be in bin.q format. That's what you need for this to ingest. It might be possible to use other formats, but I find great success with bin.q, especially because that the NEC PC-FX uses a motion JPEG compression algorithm for all the FMVs, and if there's any lag in loading, you're going to get stuttering on those FMVs. But if you just go to load after you've picked PC-FX, you can tell the program to go to wherever it needs to go to find the files that you have on your system. I just put them in a PC-FX folder here, and if you select the folder and hit OK, you're going to see that the system's automatically scanning that folder, and it's going to pop up with any game that works. If it doesn't pop up, that means your files are not correct. And the only other thing you're going to need is it's going to need a firmware file. It's going to be in firmware, not BIOS. It uses something different than the main folder structure, but we need PCFX.ROM. You'll have to find that, can't tell you where, and you should own an original PCFX to make sure that that is totally on the up and up. But I do use MedGUI Reborn. I'll leave a link below because it makes everything so easy, and it does have its own firmware folder. I just drop it in both places. I do not know if it's essential. Just put it in both. It's a 1 MB file. From there, you're going to want to come over to the emulation configuration. Sound will be perfectly fine by default. It's going to enable the sound, it's going to be the correct sound bitrate, and then you can do a per game configuration or per system configuration. I recommend per system when you're just dealing with the PC-FX, because you really don't need to change much whatsoever. If we go over to the video filter settings, you're going to have all of the different deinterlacing options as well as window scale, so you can scale that internal resolution, and you can also put it up to full screen. For a deinterlacer, you can choose Weave, you can choose Bob, totally up to you. They do have different looks, and if you want to launch it in full screen, just make sure that is toggled there. I don't do it just for captures, it's easier to get the window with OBS. For the rest of the filters, honestly, don't touch them whatsoever. I think it looks great the way it is. If you want to filter it, you can play around and see what's going on. But those are kind of just the only things you want to toggle are in the video tab. Everything else you should just leave as normal. If you want to get deeper into it, I'll leave a link to all of the Mednafen directions below. Once you close it, you just hit OK to save it, and all of those configurations are good. The only other thing we need to do is configure a gamepad. Now this is going to be for an Xbox Series X controller, but if you have something different, it's going to be basically the same. Once you know that your controller is working, you're going to have to bind every single PC-FX controller input to its appropriate button on the controller you're using. Just double click and then push whatever button that you were trying to bind, and you will see that it comes up with that joystick button. So long as the joystick button's in the right hand side of the screen and all of those boxes are checked, you will be 100% fine to play PC-FX with any controller that will work on Windows. I'm using Windows 10, 11, 8, 7. You should be perfectly fine no matter what you want. Double click on the play button or the name of the game, and you're going to see that the PC-FX is loading on your system. If you've never done this before though, you might think it's not working. There is a heads up sort of GUI display for the PC-FX. Just select the disk with the icon with the A button, and it'll launch directly into whatever game you told Mednafen to use. And original hardware does the exact same thing, and I know that trips some people up that have never used PC-FX emulation or original hardware. You have to tell it to load the disk, it doesn't automatically do it. But if you follow all the steps in this tutorial, you can play PC-FX at your home with whatever controller you want. Now unfortunately, I don't know any way to adapt the PC-FX controller over to a Windows system. It would be amazing if there was some sort of adapter, but honestly any controller works perfectly fine, and most of the games don't use all of the buttons on screen either, so you should be 100% fine using whatever controller you want, and you can bind the mode toggles as well. Now if you do want to get into collecting the NEC PC-FX, I absolutely love the games on the shelf. They come in mostly hard clamshells. Some games later in the console's lifespan shipped on just jewel cases and CD-ROMs, but everything inside of them is just so much fun to have on the shelf, and there are a ton of good games to play on PC-FX as well. It's nowhere near as big of a library as the PC Engine, of course it's not, but there is some fun to be had here. So after I'm done with this portion of the video, I'm going to go right into my recommended games, both that have Japanese only language as well as a bunch that have English translations at this point in time, and more PC-FX translations are on the way. But that's what I think about the PC-FX. Should you buy it? Coin flip, you decide. Should you emulate it? 100%, and you should play the games I show you next. But that is how you get PC-FX running on your PC, and that's whether or not you should buy one. The answer is, I don't know. Let's go to part 2. Alright, now that we've had that little interlude because I love that song, we can get right into the games I recommend you play on the PC-FX, and we're starting off with Zenki. Now if you read any article about this system, the first game that anyone's going to mention is going to be Zenki, and that's why it is here in the top spot. I love it because not only is it an amazing beat 'em up, but it shows the power of the PC-FX, all of the 2D capabilities, all the transparencies, and seeing a really great designed game running in 32 bits with pure 2D. And I also love the art design. These skeletons on the train here just jumping around. It's absolutely spectacular to see in motion. It's just a really good beat 'em up to go along with it. Now I will say this is not a cheap game, and it's a very short game. If you want a copy of Zenki, you're going to be spending $1,000, and you're going to be playing it for about 28 minutes until you are done. Now those 28 minutes are an absolute blast, but maybe emulate this one and not buy it because it has not gotten any cheaper over time. But that doesn't mean it's not worth playing, and I love this boss battle in particular as that death mask comes over the boy in the wheelchair's face. It gives him the ability to walk and attack, and this feels kind of like the intro to Castlevania Rondo of Blood on the PC Engine, like a homage of sorts. Obviously a completely different franchise, but it just reminded me of it. But if you're looking for one of the best games to play on the PC-FX, you're 100% going to want to check out Zenki, because for like the 28 minutes you're going to be playing the game, it is an absolute blast, and I love how it shows all of the different effects the PC-FX could handle. Like this entire fog layer right here going over the screen as a transparency, it just looks incredible. This is what the promise was supposed to be for the PC-FX, a better PC Engine showing pure 2D graphics, the best that could be done at that point in time. And had they just made games like this and made a lot of them, I think the PC-FX actually would have succeeded. But for every Zenki, there's 5 games that you just don't want to spend your time with. But these character designs, the sprites, the parallax scrolling in the background, the transparencies, everything looks amazing, and this shows you what the PC-FX was capable of. And of course, because it's an awesome beat-em-up game as well, it's not just a graphical showcase, it's also a showcase of how good the gameplay could be on the PC-FX. And I will say I absolutely love the soundtrack as well, so go ahead and listen for like 15 seconds and I'll be right back. You have no clue what the lyrics are saying, but I know it's a catchy song and I hope you like it. But as this gigantic boss morphs into this boss right here, Chikari, I will just say, and if you want to play one PC-FX game, definitely check Zenki out, it's 100% worth your time. Now moving on to another game that I absolutely recommend everyone play is Zeroagar. It's a shmup that has role-playing game elements in it. Like every PC-FX game, you're 100% always going to get a full motion video intro into the story, but I will say a lot of the cutscenes and a lot of the animations are spectacular. If you were just watching this as like kind of an anime online, you would probably be into that animation style. They put a lot of work into the intros to some of these games. Now I'm not going to say Zeroagar is the best shmup ever made, I'm not going to say it's a massive hidden gem. It is a very good game that has some very interesting mechanics, and it is the only shmup on the PC-FX, which is wild considering how many amazing shmups were on the PC Engine and the TurboGrafx. I do not know why NEC, Hudson Soft, and developers didn't put more of the games that made the PC Engine successful on the PC-FX. They just absolutely didn't do it. I'll never understand why, and I'm sure it's part of the reason it just failed completely. But like I said, the game has some very interesting mechanics, including different changeable weapons that you get throughout the course of the game. And the most interesting thing, just like Dead Rising, a game you probably didn't expect me to bring up in a PC-FX video, when you die, you have the ability to level up your character and then continue the game with those level ups from the beginning, just like Frank Rest in Dead Rising. You'll see here I died, it was intentional, and we get to upgrade our ship's status and then go right back into the game to take on everything we've seen before. It's a really interesting mechanic in a shmup, and it's not one that I think I've ever seen before. But leave me a comment down below and tell me if you know of a shmup that does that, because I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and I would be curious if any other shmup did it. But again, it's just another great graphical showcase of what the PC-FX hardware could do with these pseudo-transparency effects with this kind of waterfall going across the screen. But again, it's got another awesome soundtrack, so I'm going to give you just like 15 seconds, that way we can move on with the next game. But enjoy, because I really actually do love this one. It's just a catchy song and you can't go wrong with that. And once you get into the later levels and see some of the bigger boss designs, this kind of like horseshoe looking crab here, it just looks great. The transparency of that water, everything moving around, how quickly those sprites animate, how well they animate. It's just another awesome game on the PC-FX, and it's one that I definitely recommend whether you buy a console or if you're emulating it, you check out, because I think you're going to have a really good time. Now, speaking of good times, this is my favorite game on the PC-FX, and it's the one that I want way more people to play. It is Team Innocent. It is basically Resident Evil, except everything is 2D, and the horror elements are much lighter and much more colorful than you would expect in a traditional Resident Evil game. But this was Hudson Soft doing kind of that pre-rendered background thing a la Capcom in their own very specific way. It's colorful, it's quirky, the horror elements aren't scary whatsoever, but it is so amazing to look at and experience. This is basically what 32-bit generation would have been like if 3D was never on board the PlayStation 1 or the Sega Saturn. Imagine Resident Evil with all the pre-rendered backgrounds except sprites were running around on the screen versus polygonal models if all of those zombies were just sprites. That's what Team Innocent is. But it's a very interesting story with interesting combat mechanics and a lot of different collectibles and puzzles you need to solve. Now, unfortunately, this is not in English whatsoever, but there's a ton of good walkthroughs online, and I'll leave one down below as a link if I remember to do that. That way you can experience it as well, and I do know people are looking into translating this. It just hasn't started yet. But it's basically the PC-FX's own Resident Evil, and I love the art style and design. It just has a certain vibe and flair that I 100% enjoy. All these really weird quirky colors in the background. It feels like sci-fi horror done through an anime lens, and that's something I didn't expect that I would like when I first played the game, but it's something that I've actually come to love. And I will say again, like a lot of PC-FX games, this one has a spectacular soundtrack, so go ahead and listen like 20 seconds and I'll come back and tell you more games. That definitely has that horror sci-fi vibe going to it. It kind of sounds like something out of a John Carpenter movie, but you do get some animated cutscenes as well throughout the game. We just blow off a bomb, and I'm not going to tell you how we did that because it would be spoiling part of the gameplay. But I know this one doesn't look amazing if you've played Resident Evil, but trust me, if you want to play PC-FX, play Team Innocent. I think you're going to have an absolute blast even if it's not in English. Now on to other games that are very easy to play. There is Chip Chan Kick. If you've ever played Parasol Stars, you're going to 100% understand exactly what this game is doing before you've even picked up the controller. It's basically just jump, throw that ball in front of you, hit your enemies, and then throw them into other enemies. But it's cute, it's colorful, and the gameplay is absolutely spectacular, and it is a two-player game as well, because that's the thing, not a lot of games on the PC-FX that I would recommend are two-player experiences. There are two-player games, but I don't really think you guys want to be playing Battle Heat. Not making fun of that game whatsoever, it's just not going to appear on this list because I do not like it. But I do like Chip Chan Kick. It's definitely just a Parasol Stars clone, but that's not a bad thing because it's a ton of fun as a genre, and it doesn't really show off the hardware so much either. You could probably pull this off completely on the PC Engine, but it's another good game in a library that is relatively thin compared to pretty much every other console of its generation, and unfortunately again it's going to be another one that's very expensive, but that's why I showed you how to use Mednafen. You can emulate this, check it out, and see if it's worth buying for you. Everyone has their own mind and you get to make yours up. But it's just fun, it's quirky, it's colorful, and it's definitely one of those games that you can just pick up and play. But it also has a great soundtrack, so like the previous three, go ahead and listen, I'll be right back.
Round 7 start!
That's exactly the type of soundtrack I would expect for a game this cute and colorful, but it 100% works in the perspective of the game itself. And this is one that's very easy to recommend because it doesn't matter if you don't speak a word of Japanese, and it doesn't matter if the cutscenes have Japanese in them. You'll understand what's going on. It's instantaneously obvious how you play the game, and it is just a ton of fun. And even if it's not the most 32-bit looking thing I've ever seen, that background with all the colors the PC-FX add, and this gigantic bird with his headset on throwing around feathers, it just works. Everything lends itself to making this game cute, colorful, and fun to play, and it's definitely one that's easy to recommend as far as English speakers are concerned. Now onto the translation front, Fireland Story FX is a tactical role-playing game. Now that genre, you're either going to love it or you're not going to care about it whatsoever. There does not seem to be any middle ground as far as fans or detractors of this genre are concerned. I get it's not for everyone, but leave me a comment down below and tell me if you're into tactical RPGs or not. If you are, this one's going to be a great one to play because it's been translated fully into English. All of the written story, all of the menus, all of the weapons, movesets, and everything else. And this is one of those games, it's just a ton of fun. It's a slow burn, it's methodical, but if you like it, it's going to be great to play on the PC-FX, especially now that it has that English translation. I do wish some things actually had a little bit more control. These cutscenes basically just play out on their own. It is autoplay, but all of the moving around the map, all of the strategizing what characters you want to attack and when, it does really just work well for this type of game. And like I said, you can save anywhere you want. It is a slow burn game, but you can keep coming back to it via emulation or on original hardware, and it is a lot of fun, especially when you get later into the game. I did beat this once years ago, and it's not something that I'm going to come back to because I do remember how it ends, but it is available, and it's one of those things. It's not the most expensive game for the PC-FX either. It's something you can put on your shelf, and is 100% a game worth playing if you're into the genre, because it just kind of shows what they were doing with PC-FX. It feels different than something that was on PlayStation 1 or Sega Saturn, and definitely Nintendo 64, and it has its own vibe and its own flair and its own personality, and it is one that if you want to play PC-FX and you don't speak Japanese, that I can definitely recommend because it's a lot easier to understand with that full translation. Now here's my deep cut recommendation, and the pronunciation is impossible. Rarula. I tripped over it. I'm not re-recording that. It is impossible basically for an English speaker to say. Now the cutscenes in this game are spectacular. The soundtrack is obscenely catchy and you'll be humming it all day long. But fair warning right off the top, the actual graphics in the game are just dog crap ugly. There is no way around it. This doesn't even look like a good PC Engine game. It's an ugly game. If you see it in screenshots, you're going to think it's garbage and not worth playing. But take my word for it if you believe me when I tell you things on this channel. The actual gameplay is a ton of fun, and it is a Metroidvania game. You need to unlock new characters and new abilities to be able to see different parts of the map, and every time you meet a new character you get this really awesome cutscene when you unlock them. This is the type of game that's going to keep making you come back for more because you're going to wonder, how do I get to that next area I can see but can't access yet? And it's either an ability or a new character that you need to find, and you know they're out there. It's going to make you just keep thinking, I'll just play for 10 more minutes, try to figure it out, and I'll come back later. And it doesn't matter how ugly the game is, it is fun. And trust me, when I say it's ugly, this is one of maybe not the worst games on the PC-FX as far as the visuals are concerned, unless you're talking about the FMV cutscenes. These are a ton of fun, they're weird, they're quirky. We need to get this frog out of this chunk of ice because this frog is going to be very important for traversing a different part of the map. And the woman that we unlocked is going to get very aggressive and try to burn it out of there, and for some strange reason that staff has a bic lighter in the end of it. It's hilarious, I don't understand it, but I'm glad it is there. But now that we do have that frog character unlocked, we can change characters, and the great thing is this game's menus have been translated to English, and we're going to be able to use that frog character to finally get across that water because no other character could. That is why this game is great. It's a Metroidvania that kind of has similar vibes to Castlevania 3 where you have those different characters with different movesets where you can move around and traverse with. Just ignore the fact that this game is ugly because it is, but that's the thing. It's just fun, and this is a game that I never hear anyone mention when they talk about the PC-FX, and if you're going to get into the console, if you're going to buy original hardware, if you're going to emulate it, and you're looking for that deep cut hidden gem game, I'm telling you right now, it is this one. I'm going to try to pronounce it one more time. Rarula, and I still don't think I got it right. But those are the games I would recommend for the PC-FX. I have Battle Heat because it's cheap. I think you should play it, check it out, see what they were doing otherwise, but it's not on the recommended list. But that's the PC-FX Bible, the hardware, how to emulate it, and the games I recommend. Leave me a comment down below and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.